If you can explain to us what actually is the microbiome.
Yeah, it's a very buzzy word that, sounds and feels real technical. But essentially, the microbiome is all the microorganisms, so bacteria, viruses, and fungi. They live on and in us, and they're kind of everywhere. They're in our guts, they're in our nasal passageways, they're on our skin, and we've co-evolved with these microorganisms such that they play an important role in our health and disease. And so, for example, you're supposed to walk around with all these microbes on your skin, and they're basically a barrier between the outside world and your inside immune system. But because of the way that we're constantly showering and using antiseptic wipes and antibacterial soaps, we've killed that layer off. And so now what happens is all the allergens and pollutants in the world directly interact with your immune system. And as a result of that, we have more allergies, more asthma, all these responses that our bodies are having to things that they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to, because you're supposed to have these bacteria that are preventing your body from even seeing those things.
That's crazy. Because the idea of bacteria on our skin, it sounds so foreign, because I think when people hear bacteria, they hear, pathogens or bad stuff, and can we get sick from bacteria, right? And I think flipping the table and just understanding how bacteria can be good for us, I think that's really important to understand. Now, when it comes to the microbiome, we typically hear gut microbiome, right? That's kind of the main, at least in my opinion, the main microbiome. Where are we talking about with the gut microbiome?
Yeah, the gut microbiome is really an incredibly important part of our body, because when you think about it, all the food you eat first gets digested in the stomach, and then it makes its way through your intestinal tract to this place called the distal colon, the distant part of your colon, and that's where all the action is. That's when we talk about the gut microbiome, that's where this manufacturing, you think about this manufacturing plant with all these different departments that is literally metabolizing your food and generating all these really important molecules, including GLP-1. That's where that's happening. That's the gut microbiome.
So when you say distal, that sounds like it's far away, right? So if we zoom out here and think about our digestive tract, we start in our mouth, and then we go down into our esophagus, and then into the stomach. And then we have the small intestine, right? The small intestine's maybe, 20, 30 feet?
Yeah, if you extend it out, right. Yeah.
But then by cells with all the folds, the villi, microvilli, that could be, I think for my biology class, it was 3 football fields or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And so after that, then we get into the colon. There's a distal colon. What else? There's the ascending colon, and then the one that the transverse colon.
Yeah, and then the ileum is in there too. But I mean, this is basically exactly when you think about how far these things have to traverse, you're really kind of at the end of the track, and then you've got it's coming out of the body.
Right. If the distal colon is the main target area, how is our microbiome affected elsewhere and in the stomach? And I mean, the stomach's such a harsh environment. How are we trying to improve that with our gut microbiome? Are we trying to improve it in the small intestine as well?
There are microbes in the small intestine. There's not the work that's happening in your stomach is mostly enzymes more than it is microbes. But once you kind of get out of and the stomach is really, I mean, to be fair, it does the big lifting, right? You're eating big pieces of food, and it's kind of got all the machinery, both physical and enzymatic, that's breaking that food down. And then once it gets out of the stomach and starts going down into your intestinal tract, there are different microbes there. But when we talk about the gut microbiome, it's this, at the end where all that action is happening that we'll get into.
Within the distal colon, it seems like that's so far away. And how does that How are the different environments important within developing the microbes in our gut? For example, in our mouth, it's exposed to oxygen, and it's humid and wet and moist and all that. How do the different environments impact the microbiome?
Well, I think kind of fundamentally, the different environments mean that different microbes grow there. So when you think about even Earth, there's rainforest, there's desert, and we think about what are the plants that can grow in those different areas. Yes, they're all plants, but there's different kinds of plants that grow in those different terrains. And so your body's the same way. So as you're saying, your mouth is, moist. You've got food coming in all the time and disrupting it. And so there's certain types of microbes that can live there. And then you've got same thing with your nasal passageway. passageways. You've got certain microbes that live there. And then when we talk about the distal colon, there's when you eat food, your stomach has like a certain amount of oxygen in it, and then as you kind of go down this path, this kind of secret path to the distal colon, there's less and less oxygen. And by the time you get to the distal colon, where all this action of the gut microbiome is happening, there's actually no oxygen there. And so those microbial strains that live in the gut microbiome, a lot of them, they can't even be exposed to oxygen or they die. So it really is a different group of strains that live in the gut microbiome versus on your skin and in your mouth and other places of the body.
So if there's no oxygen there and they die, like at what point where the oxygen kind of cuts off?
It's kind of like a granular thing, so it's sort of more and more diminishing. But we just know that by the time you get to the distal colon, there's really none there.
You're like deep in it. You're like deep in the forest kind of thing.
Yes, you're deep in the recesses in a cave. Yeah.
So when you say all that action happens there, what kind of action are we talking about?
It's kind of all the new discoveries that are being made about the microbiome. And so microbiome is a new word because that really is a part of the body that's been relatively undiscovered until recently. And it's through DNA sequencing that you can start to sequence what these bugs are and what they're doing there. And so because they can't live in any oxygen, it's very hard to grow them and understand what they're doing. And so that's why this is sort of new territory. That's why the gut microbiome and all the gut health stuff that's coming out now feels so new, is because it really is new science. A couple of the really important things that are happening are metabolism of fibers and sugars. And so we all know a high fiber diet is really good for us. We're supposed to eat lots of fruits and vegetables. But you and I don't actually encode for anything that can break that food down. It's all in this gut microbiome. And so if you happen to be low or missing certain organisms in your gut microbiome, or you have a depleted gut microbiome, all that good stuff you're doing about eating those fibers, they are literally going right through you. You're not reaping all the benefit. And so what's happening is that you have these microbes in the gut microbiome that are metabolizing those fibers. And what are they doing when they metabolize those fibers? They are stimulating GLP-1, which is a hormone that we've been studying for over a decade, but now I think most people kind of know what it is, or at least heard of Ozempic and drugs like that. These are drugs that are mimicking something that your microbiome naturally makes. And what GLP-1 does, why it's so important, is because it tells your body, we just ate stuff with sugar in it, let's metabolize that sugar so you don't have sugar sitting around in your bloodstream. And the second thing it does is GLP-1 tells your brain, we just ate, we're full, we don't have to keep eating. And so when you don't have that right signaling pathway and your body isn't making GLP-1, your microbiome can't stimulate GLP-1, then you start to experience things like higher blood sugars. So your A1C can go up. If you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, those spikes can be higher. You can start to that shows up for people in terms of energy. So you get this kind of big post-lunch slump. And your energy throughout the day is kind of on an up and down roller coaster instead of being maintained properly. And probably most importantly, you start to crave foods at weird times and weird foods that you know your body doesn't need. And so sugar cravings, carbs cravings, all of those are a result of not having the proper microbiome stimulating GLP-1.
Okay, wow, lots to unpack there. So I want to touch on GLP-1. We'll get back to that. But the idea, you mentioned how our bodies can't break down these fibers. But when it gets to the colon, we have these microbes that can. So it's kind of like there's almost like a being, or these small beings that are helping us, right? I think with plant fibers, and it really comes down to cellulose, if I'm not mistaken, right? The plant structures that our bodies just don't know what to do with. And if it goes right through, then we're not getting the benefits then. Like the bacteria, I heard this thought where us as humans, we're not actually at the top of the food chain. It's bacteria and microorganisms that are actually at the top of the food chain, because they can actually break us down when it's our time to pass, right? And it's crazy to think, but these microbes that break down these fibers, are there specific fibers that are important to have?
Yeah, generally speaking, the fibers that feed these strains are found, they're soluble fibers. So things like inulin, and they're found in, you think about like going into your grocery store, into the produce section, it's all those leafy greens like your kale and collard greens, asparagus, and your fruits. So pomegranates, blueberries, raspberries. And so all of those kind of whole foods in that produce section are really great sources of soluble fiber. And of course, a lot of people also, because it's hard to get, a lot of fiber into your diet all the time, or do a home-cooked farm, to table meal every night. A lot of people also supplement with fibers. And so there's the old school Metamucil, but there's other supplements that you can use to also be a source of these fibers. And they work pretty well for feeding the microbiome too.